Hi, it's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead, and it's time for another chapter in the book Escape Down the Raging Rapids. This is the final book, number 10 in the DJ Dillon Adventure Series by Lee Roddy. So yesterday, DJ and Alfred were surrounded on three sides by fires. And as if that wasn't enough, and they were going to have to go back the way that the fires had already burnt, DJ got bit by a flea. And he saw a dead animal, I think it was a chipmunk, close by. He didn't touch it, but next to it was a tree, and it had a sign posted, plague. The animals, some of them might have the plague. And Alfred knew that the plague was spread by fleas in Europe. So probably fleas in America too. So they are not having a good time. But DJ said in the very last, I'm going to read the last chapter, Alfred, I've got to find a doctor. Come on. Let's see if there's one in that group of rafters down by the river. So they're headed down towards the river. Chapter 2, A Howling Dog. DJ and Alfred hurried along the Forest Service trail towards Mad River. On the opposite side of the nearest mountain range, Odell and Tobin were jogging single file along a deer trail leading in the same direction. Meanwhile, at Camp Sugar Pine, there was a rush to evacuate the camp before the fires reached it. Alfred's parents had not been able to come up because their pickup truck had broke down. So DJ's parents volunteered to bring Alfred back. Since neither boy had returned from their early morning hike, Dad Dillon was frantic. He was a powerfully built logger with a huge chest that seemed out of proportion to his short legs. When he was riled, he scowled fearfully and looked very intimidating. He shouted it all at the young camp counselor. How come you let those boys go out there? Mr. Dillon, I tried to tell you. Your boy and his friend didn't ask permission. They just slipped out early. Besides, at the time, the wind hadn't come up and the fires weren't so big and close. Hannah Dillon, whom DJ called Two Mom, had blue eyes, short blonde hair, and a nervous way of letting her hands flutter. Now they were steady. She laid one hand gently on her husband's powerful arm. Easy, Sam, she whispered. She raised her voice. Don't mind my husband, young man. He doesn't mean anything personal. He's just upset because their boys are in such terrible danger. Slowly, Dad Dillon nodded. It wasn't in his nature to apologize or say he was wrong. Instead, he nodded at the counselor and walked away with Two Mom. Their eyes sought vainly for the sight of DJ and Alfred coming through the smoke and flames that were advancing over the hills. Brother Paul Stagg hurried up, his saddle-colored cowboy boots raising a fine dust in the campground's pine needles. He had driven up from Stony Ridge to bring the kids he had brought up to camp last week. The lay preacher was trailed by DJ's 9-year-old stepsister, Priscilla. Two Mom looked up hopefully at the lay preacher who served Stony Ridge's community church. What'd you find out? She called. Brother Paul's deep bass voice rumbled up from his giant chest like distant thunder. They're trying to get the air command on the radio to ask if he's seen the boys. But he's so busy directing all those planes and helicopters they can't get through to him. Priscilla's face was tear-stained. They just can't leave DJ out there to burn up, she cried, clutching her mother's hand. They just can't. Two Mom bent over and gently stroked the girl's unruly hair. DJ had often teased Pris about it, saying it looked like an eagle's nest had fallen on a fence post. Pris, get hold of yourself. DJ and Alfred are going to be all right. But the fires! Enough, Pris. Dad Dylan's voice was firm. Hannah, take her over to the office and see if they've learned anything on the Sacramento or Reno radio television stations. It wasn't his nature to say please. He was a logger, plain, hard-working, and strong. Inside, he felt the terrible pain of knowing his only son was caught in the forest fires. Brother Paul removed his dove-colored cowboy hat and ran a ham-sized hand over damp, red golden hair. He squinted at the smoky skies with concerned eyes. In embroidered cowboy shirt, jeans, boots, and hat, he stood nearly 7 foot tall. Sam, the good Lord knows how to take care of those boys. DJ's father tried to nod, but he couldn't. I shouldn't have let him come to camp, he said fiercely. The lay preacher laid a hand firmly on the shorter man's powerful, muscled shoulders. Don't you go blaming yourself, Sam. This here's a Christian camp, and your boy needed to be here, same as Alfred and all them kids. He jerked his chin towards a line of cars parked haphazardly on the narrow blacktop curved road that ran in front of the rustic camp headquarters. Parents were hurrying their children, hastily stuffing camp clothes, blankets, and toiletries into their vehicles. They had one goal: to get out of the fire area as fast as possible. Dad Dylan felt momentary anger. Fire officials had ordered the camp evacuated. That wasn't too difficult, since most parents had already driven in to pick up their children after the closing lunch. But to Sam Dylan, it seemed that those other parents were running away. They were rushing their children to safety, leaving him alone with the terrible fear that his boy might be dying in the approaching flames. I can't blame them, he thought. Aloud he said, Brother Paul, did you get through to the Milfords a while ago? Since they don't have a phone, I left a message at the little store near where they live. By now, John and his wife should know about their son and yours. Brother Paul turned and looked back at the stand of soaring conifers where green-painted cabins nestled in the forest. I expect the Milfords are doing some mighty powerful praying about now. Dad Dylan nodded. John Milford had worked at the lumber mill with him. Right now, praying was about all Alfred's parents could do. Both Sam Dylan and Brother Paul felt silent, looking around at the smoke rising from the fast-approaching fires. The threatened camp rested in a small valley between two forest-covered mountain ridges. The big lay preacher's voice rumbled again. I wonder if Caleb's heard yet. Caleb Dylan was Sam's father and DJ's grandfather. Sam replied, no, he probably doesn't know. He's got no neighbors nearby and no phone, you know. He won't listen to the radio because he hates the music played these days, and his TV's broken. Well, just as well. He'd be frustrated if he knew and couldn't do anything to help DJ. He wanted to come pick up DJ, of course, but he had to stay with the dogs. DJ had a little hair-pulling bear dog named Hero that he loved as only a boy can. Since Two Mom was allergic to dogs, Hero always slept outside the house when DJ was home to care for him. When the boy was away, the dog had to be sent to Grandpa Dylan. He took care of Hero along with his own dog, Stranger. Sam took a deep breath, remembering the special bond that had developed between Grandpa Dylan and DJ. Though Dad Dylan would never admit it to anyone, he wished he and DJ had the same closeness as the boy and the grandfather had. Brother Paul watched another car pull away from the curb, throwing up pine needles and fine dust in the hurry to get away. I can see Caleb now, sitting in his own rocking chair, holding his Irish shillelagh and talking to the dogs. 2 hours drive down from Camp Sugar Pine, Grandpa Dylan was on the rickety old front porch of his small frame house. He was thin as a piece of baling wire and slightly stooped in the shoulders. He wore patched overalls with a blue shirt buttoned to the neck. Long sleeves were rolled up at the elbows. He peered anxiously over the top of his wire-rimmed bifocals, past the surrounding ponderosas. Black oaks, cedars, and towards the distant smoke. He had not heard the news, but he spent too many years in the mountains not to recognize the signs of forest fire in the high country. The old man lowered his watery blue eyes to the dogs at his feet. Stranger, part pointer mix, was asleep with his head on his forepaws. He was medium-sized, mostly white with some blotches of black. He was not a good-looking dog, but Grandpa didn't care. Hero, DJ's dog, was so ugly he was cute, as Pris had said. Hero was reddish-brown, shaggy-haired, with a stub tail. A long, funny black nose stuck out from his muzzle like a plum on a thumb. He had been restless all morning. He sat on his haunches, staring off towards the distant smoke. The old man lightly touched his rubber-tipped cane to the splintery porch floor. You know, dogs, I'm right glad DJ and them other kids finished their week of camping. Smoke appears to me to be coming right about from where they went. But if I calibrate correct, they should have left for home right about now. He shifted uneasily in his old rocking chair, using the Irish shillelagh to ease his arthritic hip. Like many people who lived alone, the old man talked aloud when no other human was around. Yes, sirree. You dogs are going to see DJ pretty soon, I reckon. Old Hero will just about twist himself in two from happiness. Stranger, you're more like me. You'll be mighty glad to see the boy, but you won't show it too much. Suddenly, DJ's dog lifted his head and cocked it to one side. There was something spooky about the action that made the hair on Grandpa Dylan's bare forearms stand on end. It was especially scary because this was the second time it had happened this morning. What's the matter? What's wrong, Hero? The scruffy mutt was half hound, a quarter Airedale, and a quarter Australian Shepherd. But he was 100% love when it came to DJ Dylan. Slowly, Hero stood, sniffed the air, testing it, sensing something more than the smoke barely noticeable from the faraway flames. Grandpa shoved himself to his feet with the aid of his cane. He's a-doing it again. He bent over the dog. What is it, Hero? Grandpa lightly touched the hair puller's broad head. The dog moved away, scarred ears perked, whining softly, staring at the distance. Grandpa glanced at Stranger. His dog was still asleep with his head on his front paws. Whatever it is, Grandpa mused thoughtfully, it's not bothering Stranger none. But he's my dog, and that hair puller bear dog is all DJ's. Suddenly, Hero threw up his head and let out a mournful howl that spun Grandpa around. He felt the short hair stand on the back of his neck. Goosebumps crawled across his back, shoulders, and down his arms. Something's happened to DJ, Grandpa exclaimed. Something terrible. Grandpa couldn't explain it, but he was absolutely sure he was right. From a lifetime of being around dogs, the old man formed some strong opinions about mysterious bonds that sometimes exist between certain dogs and their masters, like Hero and DJ. Hero finished a long, quivering howl, took a breath, and threw up his muzzle again. The dog's anguished cry from across the hills slowly died in the distance. Grandpa looked up at the sky, still blue, but starting to turn gray from the distant smoke. The goosebumps tingled on his arms as he began to pray. Lord, I don't know what it is, but something's is happening to my grandson. I ain't one to ask you for a whole lot of things. You know, but take care of DJ. Do it now, please. Amen. In the high Sierras, over 60 miles away, DJ suddenly stopped in the trail. Alfred nearly bumped into DJ as he turned and looked behind them. Alfred asked, "What's the matter?" I don't know. DJ felt a little foolish saying it. He glanced all around. Thought I heard something. Maybe a deer or a bear running for the fires. Come on, let's get down to the river. DJ nodded, but stood still a few seconds, listening and looking. He saw nothing but flames below. On the top of the ridge to the right and 100 yards or so away, Tobin stood shock still. He had climbed to the top of the ridge. A few feet below him, Odell called softly, "What'd you see?" "It's that kid again." Tobin kept his voice down. "The one who saw us. But he's with another kid wearing glasses." "You sure?" "Has to be. They're both wearing the same kind of t-shirts and caps, but the one who saw us didn't have glasses. They're heading for the river." It was a simple case of mistaken identity that would thrust DJ into great danger, though neither he nor Alfred had seen Tobin or Odell. Odell swore softly. "I told you not to burn that place. Now there's not only a witness, but he's probably told his friend. That means I'm in trouble too." Neither of them kids is going to give us any trouble, I guarantee you that. Let's hurry and beat them to the river. Maybe we can shove off with the rafters before the two get there. For their sakes, I hope so. I sure hope so, Toby said grimly. And that is the end of chapter 2. So, those guys are a lot of trouble. And Grandpa Dylan knows, even though his dad Dylan doesn't think he does. Well, we'll be reading more tomorrow and see what happens. I want to pray blessings on you and yours, in your house, out of your house, in the day and the night. Whatever you do, keep dreaming. Leave me a comment. I haven't seen very many lately. All right. Good night.